You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
All right, welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku. A little bit of a technical difficulty there for a couple of seconds, but I'm back. Back as promised. Here I am. We're going to read a paper tonight on the emergence of law, ancient Egypt, the role of Ma'at. Before we do that, just want to remind you guys that this show is a part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio. The other shows on the network you guys should be checking out.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure to check out the Harsh Reality Podcast, pro-Black perspective, and other shows coming down the road. KWAZ Radio. Also, make sure to go check out KWAZ Radio's YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe to that channel. I see in the chat room we have Dorico Cooper Photography saying peace, family. Peace to Dorico, you guys who have been following the show. You know, Dorico was has been a regular listener in the chat room, and suffered a personal tragedy recently. We wish the best for Dorico, for himself, for his family. It's good to see the brother here. So peace, family, to Dorico Cooper Photography. Yes, indeed. Let's get this microphone set. It's been a little while, so, gotta shake some dust off here tonight. So I think everything is sounding good. I think Dorico also received his free t-shirt from the free t-shirt giveaway from the Saturday Shoot the Breeze episodes. So hopefully in the near future we'll get a picture of Dorico sporting that shirt, that t-shirt. I showed you guys Daily Affirmations by Pauline a little while ago wearing her t-shirt. So, speaking of Saturday Shoot the Breeze, Saturday Night Shoot the Breeze will return this Saturday as well. So you guys can make sure to hit me up, join the Discord, join our Discord server. You can post your topics. There's a special channel for Saturday Night Shoot the Breeze topics. Post your topics and we'll go through those topics on Saturday night. Right, so make sure to go ahead and post those topics. I hope everyone is doing well. Dorico Cooper Photography says I did. Thank you. Hope everyone's doing well. Glad you can tune in. I was on a little hiatus, had some things to take care of, but I'm back now. I'm back, so you guys could expect to see me back on Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturday. All right, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right, so make sure you guys tune in. So let's get to the paper. The emergence of law in ancient Egypt, the role of Ma'at. This article, the emergence of ancient Egyptian law out of religion, and specifically arising from the concept of Ma'at, is discussed, as well as the important role played by religion, and specifically Ma'at, in the ancient Egyptians' understanding and development of the law. An attempt is made to indicate that the ancient Egyptians indeed had law, to explain what the ancient Egyptians understood by law, followed by a discussion of the development of ancient Egyptian law and key jurisprudence elements of ancient Egyptian law. So we see the key words here: ancient Egypt, emergence of Egyptian law, importance of religion, HP, HPW, Ma'at, jurisprudence, justice, balance, partiality, tradition, precedent, custom. So the introduction goes, law has existed as long as organized human society, but its origins are lost in the mist of prehistory. The advent of writing left a record from which the living institutions of the past may be reconstructed. In many instances, the emergence of truly legal concepts was derived from religion, though over time, law emerged separately from religion. Religion was present in every aspect of the Egyptian life. It was embedded in society, rather than being a separate category. Every aspect of the world was seen as being governed by a divine power, which established and maintained order. Their beliefs and practices assisted the ancient Egyptians to understand and respond to events in their lives. It was religion and the cult actions deriving from those beliefs that held ancient Egyptian society together, allowed it to flourish for more than 3,000 years. All right? Addendum A, at the end of this article, gives a summary of ancient Egypt's timeline. So we'll go over that at the end as well. As a matter of fact, let's look at it now, actually. So Addendum A talks about ancient Egypt's timeline. So the early dynastic period is from 2950 to 2575. Right? That includes the first dynasty, second and third dynasties. In the third dynasty, from 2650 to 2575, you have the step pyramids at Saqqara. That period is followed by the Old Kingdom, which is 2575 to 2125. That includes the 4th through the 8th dynasties. The 4th dynasty is where you get the Great Pyramid at Giza. Right? That's 2575 to 2450. The 5th dynasty is 2450 to 2325. That's where you get the pyramid texts. And in that time, there's 9 kings, ended with Yunus. The 6th dynasty, 2325 to 2175, you have 5 kings, ending with Pepi II. In that time, the great development was Harkuf's expeditions, right? And then finally, in that Old Kingdom period, there was the 8th dynasty from 2175 to 2125. After that period came the first intermediate period, which lasted from 2125 to 2010. During that time, there was a civil war. That time includes the 9th and 10th dynasty, as well as the 11th dynasty, the first part of it, right? During the 11th dynasty, at least in the first part, from 2080 to 2010, there were 3 kings, including Intef II. Following that period is the Middle Kingdom period from 2010 to 1630. Now, these dates, of course, are, you know, so-called BC dates, right? In the Middle Kingdom period, we have the 11th dynasty, the second part of it, from 2010 to 1938, where there were 3 kings, ending with Mentuhotep IV, right? That's followed by the 12th dynasty, which had 8 kings, including Amenemhat, Senusret I and Senusret III, right? This is the golden age of literature during this 12th dynasty. During this time, it's the 14th dynasty and the 15th dynasty. And the 15th dynasty will see the Hyksos invasion. Right? Going further, you have the 16th dynasty, 17th dynasty, where there's several kings, and then with Kamos. Right? Following that time is the New Kingdom era, which is the 18th dynasty. The 18th dynasty, from 1539 to 1292, you have about 15 kings, including Amhos, Thutmose I, Thutmose III, Hatshepsut, right? Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and Horemheb. During that time, as far as developments go, in the 18th dynasty, you had the reunification, you had the Battle of Megiddo, and you had the Minor Revolution. After that period was the Ramesside period, which involves the 19th dynasty and 20th dynasties. 20th dynasty included 10 kings. Of them is Ramses the Fifth and Ramses the Sixth. As you guys know, Ramses is talked about in the Old Testament of the Bible. Following that, so imagine all this time that has passed, and then Ramses is just mentioned in the beginning of the Bible here, right? In the third intermediate period, you have the 21st dynasty, 22nd dynasty, 23rd, 24th, 25th. During those times, you have 5 kings in the 25th dynasty, starting with Pianki. As far as development goes, you have political division during these dynasties. You have the Kushite conquest. And that is the late period from 664 to 332. That includes the 26th dynasty through to the 25th dynasty. The 26th dynasty through the 31st dynasty. So the 26th dynasty, there's 6 kings, starting with Samtek I. 27th dynasty, which is the first Persian period, has 5 kings, including Darius I. 28th dynasty through the 31st dynasty. When you see 31st dynasty, there's the second Persian period. So this is the times of Persian conquest, starting in the 27th dynasty, right? This is when it wasn't us again. So then you have the Macedonian dynasty from 332 to 309. Alexander the Great occurs from 332 to 323. And then you have the Ptolemaic period, which is 309 to 330. In that time is the death of one Cleopatra, right? So that's just to give you an idea of the timeline, since it was mentioned here in the introduction. Again, I want to thank you guys for being here tonight as we return. Hope you guys enjoy this reading as we come to understand Ma'at, how Ma'at came to be. So part 2 of this paper is the religious background. The law stood above all humans and was personified by the goddess Ma'at. The concept of Ma'at representing truth, justice, righteousness, the correct order, and balance of the universe. Egyptian law was essentially based on the concept of Ma'at, which was about morality, ethics, and the entire order of society. The goal of Ma'at was to keep the chaotic forces at bay, the idea of order as the grundlage of the world, upon which the legal system was based in turn. The ancient Egyptians saw no difference between human and divine justice. Ma'at represented a sense of moral responsibility. Part 3, the emergence of law in ancient Egypt. The organization of the legal system in ancient Egypt was governed by religious principles, and it was believed that the law had been handed down from the gods to mankind at the time of creation, that the gods were responsible for maintaining the concept of law. Egyptian law was based on a common sense or view of right and wrong, following the concept of Ma'at. In ancient Egypt, religion has always been significant in terms of legal relations between people. This close relationship and interdependency between religion and law had one very important consequence. Since the gods were perceived as the guardians and source of the established order, they were consulted for a proper decision in doubtful cases. The ancient Egyptians, therefore, employed alongside the usual legal process also divine judgment, which placed the omniscience of a divinity at the service of judicial proceedings. Law emerged as a mechanism to maintain Ma'at on earth, with the king playing an important part by making law. The king is a king god. The king, as a king god, was the supreme judge and lawgiver. The king, with laws, was in a position to transform the vertical belief in Ma'at between man and the gods to horizontal reality, Ma'at between people on earth. The king's primary duty was to uphold the order of creation, which had been established on the primeval mound at the time of creation and kingship in Egypt, therefore represented the effective power of Ma'at. As the son of the sun god, he was entrusted with the task of upholding Ma'at. The pharaoh's duty was to defend Ma'at in order to maintain and restore order, which he did by issuing appropriate laws. Laws was therefore tied up with a religious worldview and represented the rules regulating the behavior of members of society. The king upheld the law and was also subject to the law. He had to live his life according to the principles of Ma'at, and furthermore, he had to maintain Ma'at in society. He was therefore expected to rule by Ma'at. In order to attain Ma'at on earth, he had to make law. The word for law was HP, I guess, HIP, and the plural was HPW. And HP was also later translated to include regulations and statutes. It was essentially Ma'at that necessitated the need for law. The king was therefore the link between law and Ma'at, or law and religion. It would appear that the king, the vizier, who fulfilled the role of a prime minister in our modern terminology, and the great courts located at Memphis had jurisdiction over crimes against the state. The king was the head of the judicial administration, but unfortunately no evidence survives from the Old Kingdom to suggest that the king could hear and decide cases himself. The purpose of law in ancient Egypt was to realize Ma'at on earth. The king was the link between law and Ma'at. Kingship in ancient Egypt therefore effectively represented the effective power of the order of Ma'at. The king was seen as a source of law since the ancient Egyptians regarded him as a god. His word, therefore, had the force of law, and he was also regarded as the primary source of law. The king's duty to make laws is summarized in text by the phrase, putting Ma'at in place of injustice, and on temple walls by images of the king presenting the symbol of Ma'at to the gods. This scene of the presentation of Ma'at first appears as an iconographic device in the time of Thutmose III, where her effigy was presented to the gods by the king as sustenance. The ancient Egyptians believed that only the king knew the requirements of the Ma'at principle, and that his laws were identical to the will of the creator God, which was why the king could maintain law and order, and why these laws and rulings of the king reflected the world in harmony. It was the king's duty towards the gods and the people to maintain Ma'at by means of promulgating law. The vizier was the king's delegate, the high priest of Ma'at, as well as head of the courts of justice. Sometimes the king had to delegate his authority, and it is believed that the legal official then wore a golden Ma'at pendant. The goddess Ma'at was important to judges and their sense of duty. They were regarded as priests of Ma'at, wearing a small figure of the goddess as a pendant around their necks, thus symbolizing their judicial office. Surviving statues of high officials from the late period are shown wearing such pendants on a chain. In cases which these high officials examine will be reported to the king, who would then be responsible for punishment in more serious cases. If the law was obeyed, the principle of Ma'at was applied. But when one went against Ma'at by committing an offense, the law could be applied against the wrongdoer. The ancient Egyptians' lives were therefore governed by Ma'at, with their law being justice in action. Ma'at became the focal point of the legal system. Right, that's the HPW. And if the laws, HPW, were obeyed, one would be following the principles of Ma'at. How do you pronounce the HPW word? For those who are familiar. To continue, law asserted its autonomy as early as the age of the pyramids, whereby the role of religion in legal matters began to diminish. Religion then no longer determined the legal standing of a matter. It was rather the juridical mechanism which became authoritative, even in the religious sphere. A well-known example of this is one of the central myths in ancient Egypt, namely the contendings of Horus and Seth, known from Papyrus Bedi, dated to the mid-12th century BCE. It is a satirical account of the lawsuit between the god Horus, the rightful heir to the crown of Egypt, and his uncle, the god Seth, who usurped the crown by murdering Horus's father, Osiris. Even the gods themselves had to appear before a court in order to resolve their disputes. This myth is an expression of important Egyptian values such as justice and family solidarity. Explicit sources of law from the Old Kingdom are rare, although there is considerable indirect evidence in the form of titles and references to legal institutions or situations. There must have existed an abundance of archival documents from the Old Kingdom, since people, animals, and crop yields all had to be counted, and we see from scenes in the Old Kingdom tombs, scribes carefully recording the quantities. According to Moose, the Old Kingdom saw a diversification of uses of writing compared to the preceding early dynastic period. The first narratives from this period appear in the form of religious texts inscribed in royal tombs, so-called pyramid texts, biographies inscribed in the tombs, letters, both royal and private, agreements, and court proceedings. The first discovered legal code dates back from the late period, which is 747 to 332 BCE, and according to Teeter, there were only a few codified laws since the king was the highest judge from whom ancient Egypt and all laws emanated. Throughout its long history, the skillful ancient Egyptian government had guaranteed certain rights to the individual, which may be described as the Egyptian quote-unquote law of the period. According to the theorides, this law was embodied in statutes and protected by courts. Religious life was expressed in legal terms, like the setting up of foundations, contracts, and donations. Law regulated the entire day-to-day business of existence in the Nile Valley. According to Alam, an ultimate development in Egyptian history was the emergence of law as a notion separate from religion. He argues that the secularization of law did not necessarily imply a blasphemous profaning of legal usage. For in many instances, the emergence of truly legal concepts derived from religion. A good example of this is the emergence of private, pious foundations. Theorides questions whether one can talk about law before its elaboration by the Romans, since there is a lack of documentary evidence. There is no collection of laws from ancient Egypt, unlike Sumerian, Akkadian, Hittite, and New Babylonian law collections. And, to make it even more difficult, the ancient Egyptians used everyday language regarding their legal concepts. Theorides submits that by the beginning of the 3rd millennium BCE, the social and administrative system in ancient Egypt was based on family. What do we see currently? We see there's war against the black family and the concept of family. Right? What did our ancestors eventually look to? Right? Social and administrative system based on the family. Derico Cooper said he's not familiar with HPW and the pronunciation. So we're all going to learn something here. But if anyone who's listened to this show live or in the playback who's familiar with the terminology, please post some responses to these questions. To continue, the Palermo stone illustrates the ancient Egyptian Nile flood, the annual census of the population, and a biennial census of gold and fields from at least the 2nd dynasty onwards. It is furthermore important to note that this implies that the transfer of personal and landed property from one owner to another was known. Documentary evidence in funerary inscriptions confirms that private property did indeed exist and that it was transferable, with equality between husband and wife in the eyes of the Lord. So we often talk about our ancestors and say that they didn't believe in private property. They didn't believe in ownership of land, per se, right? But that's not really true, is it? Right? You could have owned private property and it was transferable, I imagine, in death, right? They talked about funerary inscriptions, right? So in death, you could have transferred your land, right? There's a freedom associated with land, by the way, and I always did believe that our ancestors understood that, right? Land equals freedom, right? So who then is the one telling this or giving this impression that we traditionally didn't believe in land ownership? When the Persians conquered Egypt, the fundamentally Egyptian institutions based on the individual were revived. Tradition attributes a new codification of the existing laws to Darius. Under the Ptolemies in the 2nd century BCE, judgment was given in a matter regarding conflicting interests in the succession, with the procedure, although adapted, still retaining several elements of the old traditions. Law was a living entity, and therefore did not remain unchanged over the centuries. It changed because human aspirations, conditioned by new circumstances, necessitated change. This change evolved between the poles of equality and liberty on the one hand, and that of inequality on the other. What is striking about ancient Egyptian law, according to Thucydides, is its modernity. Although remote in time, it furnished the ancient Egyptian civilization with a structure close to that with which we are familiar today. Thucydides states that the application of law was coherent despite peculiar features of procedure. Certain fundamental elements of ancient Egyptian law appear to be, among others, the great importance of justice, as well as the value that was attached to tradition, both important to maintain the bigger order of things. This brings us to the 4th section of the paper, called Development of the Law. Although sources of law in the Old Kingdom are rare, KWAZ now states that there are indirect references to law in the form of titles as well as to legal institutions. The corpus of royal decrees of a legal nature in the Old Kingdom and the first intermediate period may be divided into 7 categories, namely decrees regarding administration, decrees regarding tax exemptions, endowments of offerings, endowment decrees for immovable property, decrees for appointments, stipulations for the benefit of private individuals, and letters. Main source of law in the Middle Kingdom and the 2nd intermediate period derived from royal inscriptions, administrative papyri, private documents, private inscriptions, and literature. Although no law codes have been found for the Middle Kingdom and the 2nd intermediate period, some texts imply the existence of, if not an extensive code, then at least limited systematic collections of laws. Furthermore, Papyrus, Brooklyn, 35.1446 to 13th dynasty, refers inter alia to, quote, the law pertaining to those who desert, end of quote, and to, quote, the law pertaining to one who flees prison, end of quote. Some of the most important Middle Kingdom archive documents in terms of their legal content are the Lahun archives, the Hekanakte letters for leasing and land holdings, and the Jefa Happy contracts, which were mortuary provisions. Tomb biographies like those of Beni Hassan in the 12th dynasty also occasionally have statements referring to legal matters and administration. Texts initially written on papyrus were often inscribed on temple and chapel walls, obviously to provide security to the legal document. Literary texts from the Middle Kingdom, such as Tale of the Eloquent Peasant and the Story of Sinu, also include legal material, and in the passage from the Admonitions of an Egyptian Sage, which describes a society in chaos, the speaker says, "Lo, the laws of the chamber, or prison, are thrown out. Men walk on them in the streets. Beggars tear them up in the alleys." Religious texts, such as the coffin text, often also contain certain elements relating to law. The New Kingdom has an abundant and a more varied corpus of legal texts than the Old and Middle Kingdoms. although it did not produce a legal code, detailed royal edicts like the Nori Decree, together with possible references for systematic law collections exist. For example, in the decree of Horemheb, the king states, quote, "I have given to them, the judges, oral instructions and laws in their books." And in Papyrus Bulak 10, for instance, one party cites the, quote, law of Pharaoh, end of quote, as a precedent. And in Papyrus Turin 2021, a man introduces a law with the following words. The king said, "The New Kingdom documents are concerned with sales, loans, leases, disputes, litigation, marriage, adoption, partnerships, and inheritance." You see, when I read that, very interesting. Very interesting. Like, we would think of this time to be a primitive one, right? We would think because it's so long ago it had to be so primitive, but look at what they were putting down. And this is where our ancestors, this is the source of our ancestors. Look at what our folks were putting down. And how Europe underdeveloped Africa, you get the idea of, because black folks were scattered after Kemet, basically on the run, they didn't have the leisure for innovation. They didn't have the leisure to sit down and create new things and make new laws and just to generally innovate. I once read that nationhood, nation building is about creating peace for your people. And I have to agree that's what it is. And you don't have peace without war. You have to fight to maintain the peace of your nation. So you have to be capable at war. And once you do that, once you protect your people and give them the ability to innovate, to think, to produce ideas and thoughts, that's when you're going to have a thriving nation. Egypt is our example of it. Before all the wars and invasions, our ancestors in Kemet was putting in work in terms of building nations and had structure. And I gotta say this too, in light of some things I've been studying during my hiatus from during the podcast. We lack structure. We're supposed to be in a pre-nation building phase right now, where we are creating social contracts with different groups of black folks around the globe. We're not there. In fact, we're actually kind of infighting, right? We're not there. Look to our ancestors here and see what they guys, I mean, these guys in their time, we're talking about loans and leases, handling legal disputes, to marriage deals, adopting children, dealing with laws for inheritance, how to pass on private property and land. Now today, we are ruled by the laws of the land that we find ourselves in. We're not doing the work of really nation building. All right? These are folks, as it says here, most of this material derives from Thebes in southern Egypt, while other documents like the legal text of Meds are from Memphis in the north of Egypt and contain references to court disputes, confirming the existence of government archives. These ancestors control their lives. we're sitting around happy for these foreigners, our enemy, to control all these things for us. This is why when guys like Michael Jackson and Prince died, these folks would come with their own wills and say, wait, hold on. You say you have a will from Prince or Michael Jackson? Michael Jackson's mom has a will? Nah, that's not the will. We have the real will here. We are not doing the work. To continue, the lexical texts that were found comprise a mixture of paragraphs, with some appearing to be excerpts from a law code, while others apparently derived from clauses in standard contracts. This mixture of law code paragraphs and contractual forms is found in the Demotic Codex Hermopolis, or the Papyrus Matha, dated to the Hellenistic period, which provides evidence that similar scholastic traditions must have existed in ancient Egypt, despite the fact that none have been found yet. According to Manning, the so-called Codex Hermopolis is a collection of texts, or rather a manual, which provides guidance for legal solutions in unusual or difficult cases. The guidelines contained in this document were used by the priest judges to resolve disputes and serve as a guide to the writing of certain legal instruments. So what they're saying in this last two paragraphs here is that when Egypt was invaded and taken over by these foreigners, that these foreigners didn't create anything, really didn't add anything to Egypt. They just carried on what our our black ancestors had already created. Think about it. These folks just invaded and took over and just carried on the work. We had done the work already. In the chat room, I see we got KW Don 7. Good to see you, KW Don 7. Really good to see you. KW Don 7 says, the black collective in the diaspora is dysfunctional. We are a collective of individuals as opposed to an individual collective. I absolutely agree. See, we bought into the European idea of individualism, and we've given up the African idea of the collective. Right? I am as you are. Right? I am as KW Don 7 is. I am as the Rico Cooper photography is. If those brothers aren't free, I can't be free. So for me to be free, we have to see them free as well. I am as they are. The European is like I am. And if you don't believe me, look it up in your Old Testament Bible. The European says, I am. Talks about himself. He doesn't care if if KW Don 7 was white, the Rico Cooper photographer was white, or European, or whatever you want to call them, and they were enslaved, white boy wouldn't care. Once he's free, he's good. And that's them historically. We have taken on that mentality. Right? Once we have the Oprahs, the Michael Jordans, LeBron Jameses, whoever else, right? We now focus on trying to get like that individual. We don't focus on being collectives who join in equal prosperity, right, with the Oprahs and the LeBron Jameses of the world, Michael Jordans of the world, right? We can learn something from our ancestors. Our ancestors didn't wait for someone to sun them. They didn't sit around and wait for someone to come and create institutions and laws for them. In fact, they created them, and someone else was able to come in and inherit it. To continue, Theoretes affirms that although ancient Egypt did not provide a legal code, the application of law is coherent despite peculiar features of procedure. It is important to realize that there was a procedure in existence with laws to govern its use. You see, this is where the writer acknowledges what I just said. It is not clear how the ancient Egyptians defined the various legal categories, but apparently they proceeded as though these were similarly defined to those in modern times. For instance, a property transfer on death, law of succession, is clearly distinguished from a property transfer between living persons, in particular by the fact that the property does not change hands at the same time. A surviving spouse is not automatically an heir, but can be made one, right, a legatee, owing to the freedom to make a will. This in turn led to a new social and legal circumstances and subsequently the creation of new law. And with this will, the person making the settlement modifies the legal destination of the property. According to Theoretes, ancient Egypt does not present an example of the secularization of law. On the contrary, however, it attained from the onset, during the Old Kingdom, a high level of institutional and juridical development. It is known that classical writers, such as Diodorus, wrote respectfully of law and justice in ancient Egypt. Other lawmakers, including probably Plato, traveled to Egypt in order to study law. It's noteworthy that the Persian king Darius I is believed to have held Egyptian law in such high esteem that he ordered the collection of all that was known of Egyptian law prior to the Persian conquest and produced a codification written in the Demotic script. It is interesting to note that the history of law, which played itself out over millennia in the Mediterranean, had its foundation and origin in Pharaonic Egypt. Your ancestors were trailblazers. Your ancestors were the master teacher, right? You need to keep that in mind. Let me do a quick station ID break right here. I will be back on the other side.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, sir. Make sure you check out those shows on KWAZ Radio. And it's not official yet, but Revolutionary Matron, who's often in the chat room, she has kicked off her show as well. And we hope to make that an official part of KWAZ Radio. So check out Revolutionary Matron's channel as well. In the chat room, KW7 says black folks are focused on the bag. The hell with the community at large, and that's absolutely true. And that's something learned from the oppressor. That's something learned from the oppressor. In fact, the whole paper chase, the whole idea of trying to secure the bag, the paper chase, all that, if you look at it and how it works and how to be successful is a fully European concept. It's a fully European concept. We have to change our outlook. We got to find solutions to how to implement this change. Curriculum is one way, but we got to actually do some active work out here. I truly believe it's the job of the conscious to change to change the unconscious. I don't believe that you must overextend yourself to trying to change the unconscious, but the effort must be put in. The seeds of change must be planted, and hopefully one day they will change. All right, but we got to really start getting into doing black work. Every one of us should have some black work that we carry out on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. And in that black work should be trying to bring people to consciousness, bring people to the concept of building powerful nations, or a powerful nation. All right? That's what we got to do. This brings us to section 5 of the paper called Jurisprudence. Jurisprudence is described as the science of philosophy of law. One of the greatest Roman Dutch jurists, Hugo de Groot, wrote the following in his book, Introduction to the Dutch Jurisprudence. He says, jurisprudence is the science of living according to justice. Justice is the moral virtue of doing what is just. That is just which is in accordance with right. Groot further states that the term right is used in both a wide and narrow sense. In its wider sense, right is the agreement of the act of a reasonable being with reason in as far as another has an interest in such an act. And in its narrow sense, right is the relation which exists between a reasonable being and something that belongs to the same being. Alam argues that, judging from the ancient texts, it appears that the ancient Egyptians had no concept of jurisprudence as a discipline, since there is no attestation for theoretical deliberations as the basis of substantive law. You'll notice something, by the way. You'll notice that Europeans always make something difficult. When you look at today's legalese is intentionally written to be difficult to understand. And it's in that difficulty, it's in that creating something to be difficult that can be so simple, is where they play the game of deception. So you always have to be careful of a European interpretation of something African, because they always got to make it something that allows them a chance, right? It's deceptive, it's deceitful, it's all in service of giving them a chance to get in, right? To continue, I am, however, of the opinion that it is possible to attempt to identify key elements of jurisprudence in ancient Egyptian law. The Egyptian word for law is HP, right? Which admits the same range of translations, rule, regulation, habit, right, ceremony, cycle, as NT, translated as custom. The underlying idea of both these terms is the idea of recurrence, exemplified by the cosmos and the behavior of earthly beings. Both NT and HP resorted under Maat, which literally means the one who steers, the embodiment of order, which is the reason why both supposedly existed from the beginning of time. The Codex Hermopolis, dated to the 3rd century BCE, proves that the consideration of legal questions, isolation, and abstract elaboration of legal norms were known to the ancient Egyptians. This code was not confined to local use, and several copies might therefore have existed, circulating throughout ancient Egypt towards the onset of the Hellenistic era. The mention of harvest time provides a clue to its date of origin. Harvesting occurs between May and June. which does not correspond with the calendar in use during the 3rd century BCE when the text was transcribed. The harvest time mentioned in the papyrus corresponds rather to the calendar of the 8th century BCE, to the time when a fluctuating calendar was used. It may therefore be assumed that the relevant paragraphs were taken from a much older manuscript reflecting conditions of the 8th century BCE. The Codex Hermopolis contains portions of a variety of texts from different periods, which have most probably been reworked by jurists of the early 3rd century BCE. As the author proceeds from inter alia, earlier sources, without stating this explicitly, it is possible that he may have reworked laws of earlier kings, using them as a basis for his own decisions. Many papyri show that laws from pharaonic times were still valid in the early Hellenistic era. So they're clearly saying laws from Black Egypt, Black Kemet, were still valid in the early Hellenistic era. All right? The Recto contains texts dealing with an unusual subject, namely theoretical legal discussions, divided into approximately 2,000 articles, grouped into 4 sections, and according to Alam, the first of these sections deals with tenant farming arrangements and disputes between the tenant and the owner or leaseor. The texts include contract formulae, which served as templates, and the arrangements to be made, for instance, by the purchaser of a house to protect his interests against an unfair seller. I mean, isn't that the lemon law that we have today? Included are also rental agreements for various types of buildings and an exposition of litigation arising from non-payments of rent. Partial marriage settlement is discussed in detail in this papyrus. In this case, the woman ceded a considerable part of capital to her husband, who in turn guaranteed her an endowment. The concern was not with the marriage settlement as such, but rather in respect of the disputes that could arise between father-in-law and husband in case the contract was not honored. This is followed by cases regarding immovable property. For example, when a person built a dwelling on a plot of land, and the title to said land was later claimed by another, the procedure is then described to be applied in order to settle the dispute, and it is thereafter followed by a discussion of various disputes among neighbors. The final text of the Codex Hermopolis deal with the law of succession, and more specifically with the position of the eldest son in disputed cases, and it therefore addresses various actions regarding inheritance. The position of the eldest son, that's something that we still carry on to today, right? That's what we still carry on to today. In the chat room, I see we got Azuliism with us today. Peace to Azuliism, saying capitalism is about individualism. Absolutely. Capitalism is about chasing the bag over the community. You can't have Ma'at. This is Azuliism saying you can't have Ma'at in this capitalist system. Now that's an interesting thought. That's an interesting thought, because Ma'at is in service to the community. It's about you proclaiming not having certain transgressions that would hurt the community. Right? I have not lied to my neighbor. I have not, cheated with his wife or what have you. Right? This system of Ma'at is your personal responsibility to your community. Capitalism, as Azuliism stated, there's no individual commitment to a community under capitalism. So a question I'll ask for you guys listening live: under what economic system can we have Maat? Is there an economic system out there right now in which we can have Maat? You know, of course we can have it in the Ubuntu system or the Emoja type of economic system, right? But those aren't prevalent right now. Is there a system at all where we can practice or have Ma'at, right? Thanks for that comment to Zuliism and previous comments to KW Don 7 and Derico Cooper Photography. All right, let's continue. Right, so we see these guys had, they had a code, right? They had laws. These guys weren't haphazard like we see in some countries and some situations today. These guys actually had case law. They had archives. They went back to look at rulings of previous kings and previous priest judges. What are we doing today? From the following discussion of Alam, it is evident from contemporary documents that all issues treated in the text are cases which reflect daily life issues, procedures for the admission of evidence on which the judge would make his decision. I mentioned several types of admissible evidence like oaths or entries in official registers are known from other contemporary texts, and the papyrus therefore provides valuable overviews of law in Egypt during the early Hellenistic period. Importantly, as Alam then notes, only questions relating to private property are discussed, omitting matters of criminal law, and it appears that the author was only interested in matters pertaining to the property rights of individuals. The author therefore classified formulations in sections according to subjects with appropriate subdivisions, and the arrangement of the material indicates an author who knew very well how to systematically treat legal questions, although it might not entirely correspond to our systems today. In order to discuss the topics, the author conceived apparent theoretical disputes and situations designed for guidance in the judgment of a relevant case. He also provides definitions for defendant and plaintiff. And in addition, he makes use of abstract classification, developing, for example, the notion thing, or neket, which the latter Roman jurists would call res. The author thereupon argues that when studying legal history, it is important to realize that the author of the Codex Homopolis text shows himself to be qualified as a jurist. He was a true jurisprudent. Previously, it was doubted whether there were scholars in ancient Egypt who could qualify as jurists in a strict sense of the word. But today their existence is undisputed. Right? You had dudes who lived a life of truth. Ancient Egyptian jurists treated legal materials systematically and clearly followed a specific principle of organization with subdivisions in every category. A deepening of juristic thought took place, which may be regarded as the point of departure for law as a rigorous scientific discipline and the beginning of genuine jurisprudence. Regarding elements of legal philosophy, the following section from the instruction of the Vizier, Reckmeyer, is of importance. I judge both the insignificant and the influential. I rescue the weak man from the strong man. I reflect the fury of the evil man and subdue the greedy man in his hour. I succored the widow who has no husband. I established the son and heir on the seat of his father. I gave bread to the hungry, water to the thirsty, and meat, oil, and clothes to him who had nothing. I was not at all deaf to the indigent. Indeed, I never took a bribe from anyone. In Reckmeyer's instructions, it is laid down that justice is to be rendered in public in such a way that every person shall at all times be able to secure his rights. In this regard, an appeal is made to a sense of equity, and by implication of jurisprudence, as it is pointed out that the records of all judgments are kept in the archives of the vizier to be consulted. The composition of these instructions must go back to the 13th dynasty, but the best copy we have is that of Reckmeyer's instructions. Among the most influential precepts and values in the Egyptian jurisprudence are a strong preference for tradition, a view that theoretical skill should be admired, and a desire to achieve impartiality, social equity, as Reckmeyer's inscription demonstrates. Taking everything thus far said into account, it is my opinion that two very basic and fundamental elements of Egyptian law may be identified and will now be discussed in the following subsections. Brings us to section 5. Justice, balance, and impartiality. According to Alam, Ma'at subordinated the social order to a broad concept of equity. Since the ancient Egyptians had a well-developed sense of justice, the choice of taking the law into one's own hands was out of the question. The only admissible means of defending disputes was by due process in the courts, and with their sense of justice and social responsibility, they did not only advocate their own rights, but also those of others. The legal process itself is in essence an attempt to reach a result which both parties involved in a dispute are willing to accept and to function fairly. A legal process should allow adversaries to explain their respective points of view. Because of the ancient Egyptians' keen interest in and love for rhetorical speech, this could facilitate a robust legal process, enhancing the capacity for the Egyptian courts to reach just verdicts. Law was therefore essentially based on a concept of justice, which was antonymous to falsehood and injustice. The courts were governed by the principles of Ma'at. The vizier in control of the law courts had the title of priests of Ma'at. Breasted observes as follows: social, agricultural, and industrial world of the Nile dwellers under the empire was therefore not at the mercy of an arbitrary whim on the part of either the king or court, but was governed by a large body of long respected law, embodying principles of justice and humanity. Social equality and impartiality are basic concepts of fairness. These concepts dictate that everyone should be treated equally and the same before the law. In ancient Egypt, the pinnacle of concern for legal neutrality occurred during the first intermediate period and the Middle Kingdom. All right? From the instructions of the Vizier Merakir, it is clear that it was seen as important to judge objectively. The Middle Kingdom, a legal perspective was developed that everyone had equal rights and opportunities, or at least that everyone should have them, that everyone should also have access to social justice. This is a unique idea in human history, existing in ancient Egypt more than 1,000 years before the evidence of similar thinking by the Greeks and the Hebrews. And let's keep it real. The Greeks and Hebrews got it from where? They got that thinking from where? Right? Come on. So this is section B, 5B, tradition, precedent, and custom. The overarching first impression of Egyptian civilization is that of a coherent entity that spans almost 40 centuries of unchanging stability, and that the ancient Egyptians were conservative and tradition bound. All right. Who are the most conservative people you know today? If we're keeping it real, who do you know? Which people do you know today are the most conservative people? Right? In chat room, KW Don 7 says, some say scientific socialism as articulated by Kwame Ture. Yes. Ture and Nkrumah, even the Yere in a sense, were kind of doctrinaire, scientific socialists. But there's a fundamental problem with socialism. It's not African centered, right? Azuliism says too much righteousness in Ma'at. You can't steal and monopolize seeds to keep people from growing their own food. Can't have usury in Ma'at. You're right. You're absolutely right. Ma'at is all about fairness, right? Azuliism just answered my last question, is Africans. The most conservative people you know are black, which equals African people. That's a fact. We are about traditions and laws, right? Muslims, certain groups of them are conservative, right? But if you look at it, I would say even more so than, say, the Muslim as a religious group, you look at people, it would be Africans. A lot of Africans practice Islam, right? Azuliism says only pure communism might work. And we don't even know if that's true because we've never seen communism really have a chance. Right? If I'm not mistaken, we've never really seen communism have a full chance. But definitely communalism, right? African communalism could do it. We have to get back to communalism, but to practice communalism, you have to have a nation. You have to have the land and the protections of having land around you to practice whatever economics you want to practice, right? You have to have a nation, or at least a pre-nation, which would presuppose that you have land, right? You have to have land and the ability to protect it. That's what we got to be on now. You got to be thinking about that heavy, right? To continue. It might be that the internal geographical unity of the country contributed to the apparent lack of change, and that nature supplied a secure world and fixed harmonic routines. So you see that line right there? I like that line. Nature supplied a secure world with fixed harmonic routines. The reality of, when you're talking about nation building really requires you to control nature to carry out your needs. Right? I did an episode on this a long time ago. It's in the episode where I talked about ego. You can go back and look this up. If I might say so, it was a good episode too. Right? But the idea is that as human beings, as Black equals African people, right, we supposed to be able to control nature in our environment to make it work for us, to make it provide what we need. That's all. All of this is a part of nation building. You have to understand this stuff, right? If you have land, like I've been talking about, you have to be able to control the land so that you can get sustenance from the land. You have to be able to control the land in such a way to protect you from outsiders, from foreign invaders, right? This is what it's about. So the Egyptians had this, right? They had a nature that supplied a secure world with fixed harmony, right? Fixed harmonic routines. That's what you want in a nation. To continue, the typography of the Nile Valley protected them from invasion. What was I just saying? While the consistent annual inundation of the Nile assured them of the orderliness of life, which probably dictated recurring rituals, farming practices, and legal proceedings like the redrawing of property boundaries. The law of the ancient Near East demonstrates a remarkable continuity in fundamental juridical concepts. The appreciation and respect for the past influenced the development of law in at least two ways. In the first instance, judges kept records of their legal decisions in the archives of the vizier in order to consult them later as precedent. Secondly, because of the admiration for tradition, Egyptian law was very slow to evolve. The obvious consequence of vigorously following a precedent meant that laws remained in force for very long periods of time without modification. The ancient Near Eastern systems belonged in varying degrees to a common legal culture, which was, however, very different from what we have today. These systems shared a way of looking at the law that reflect the worldview of the cultures from which they evolved. The law probably changed and developed over a long period of time, although one should not assume that this was necessarily the case. Today, our law changes often, but in the ancient Near Eastern, different conditions existed, and the basic features of law did not undergo any radical changes for a very long time. You know what that also means? That means that, again, that means that the people were law-abiding. That means the people were law-abiding people. And they weren't out here trying to break laws and change laws to suit their individual fancy. Think about the king from England, from Britain, who wanted to get divorced in the Catholic Church. Catholic Church was against it. What does dude do? He's going to create his own church. I made that church the Church of England, right? You didn't see that with our folks in Kemet. These folks were law-abiding people. I'm not saying that they didn't do wrong things from time to time, but for the most part, they were law-abiding, and they accepted the laws of Ma'at as they were, right? They accepted it as they were. In the Old Kingdom, the king was in supreme control of legislation, and laws were conceived as expressions of ideal justice. The law promulgated remained in force as long as it was not modified or repealed. The judges, officials, or parties responsible for the law did not read the law in the same way as we do today. And there was no interpretation of the exact wording of a text, since it was not regarded as autonomous or exhaustive. General decrees could be divided into three main areas, namely institutional law, administrative law, and law concerning economic activities. The ancient Near East references to decrees attest to their existence, although they are not citations of the text. The closest the early sources came to citations were references to actions or decisions being in accordance with the words of the stele, or steel or tablet. According to Westbrook, it would appear that statutes in the form of edicts, orders, and decrees dealt with specific matters of immediate interest, and that they did not establish a source of the basic principles of law and accord. Majority of the law would have been customary in nature. And is it here that, quote unquote, the law codes, either in the written forms that we possess or as a larger oral canon from which the extant codes were drawn, could serve as a vital function? The achievement of these laws, codes, was to constitute an intellectualization of the mass of information that would have constituted customary law in the ancient Near East. Westbrook states that there is evidence that previous decisions were regarded as a source of law, and that most of the law applied by the courts was probably customary law, which derived from timeless tradition. According to him, legislation included all orders issued by the king, his officials, or local authorities. Ancient Near East orders were rather ad hoc commands, often regarding the rights of individuals or a temporary device to address current problem. This brings us to the conclusion. Before I read the conclusion, Razulism had said that, it's correct that you can't really practice your economic system under another man's roof or in another man's land. And that's something we're going to have to deal with. And also, that also means that, guess what? While you're under these people's roof, so to speak, you need to be better at the economic systems. You don't have to go all out like they do and put profits over people, right? There's still a moral code you can follow, right? Where you put people first, particularly your people first, right? But it's definitely something Black, which equals African folks, need to do more. You got to compete in the system that you're in until you can get to your own nation, your own land, right? And practice whatever economic system you prefer, right? Let me do a quick station ID. We'll come back, we'll talk about the conclusion, and I'll read any last comments you guys who are live with me right now have. All right, so we'll be back on the other side.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure to check out those shows, KWAZ Radio. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel, KWAZ Radio channel on YouTube. Right? Let's get those numbers up. I want to say I appreciate all of you who returned tonight with me for this return of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I appreciate all of you. I hope you guys got something out of this paper tonight as we head into the conclusion. And I'll be back again on Saturday. If you have a topic for Shoot the Breeze, join the Discord. The link is in the description. Join the Discord. Look for the channel for Shoot the Breeze under the podcast category. And drop your suggestions of topics for Shoot the Breeze, and we're going to go through them Again, with Shoot the Breeze, I don't know all the topics. I'm not well versed in all the topics, but with the chat room and us discussing it back and forth, we tend to have a real good discussion and flesh out some of these topics that I per se am not familiar with. So if you haven't already checked out previous Shoot the Breeze episodes, make sure you tune in this Saturday. If you have a topic or topics that you want discussed, make sure to post them on the Discord. All right, you could also show up that night and post them in the chat that night as well. But I prefer you post them ahead of time so I can at least familiarize myself with some of the topics. All right. So part 6 of this paper is the conclusion. The conclusion says the ancient Egyptians' belief in the concept of Ma'at led to the development of law in ancient Egypt. Religion played a fundamental role in the ancient Egyptians' understanding and development of law. Law therefore emerged and developed out of religion, and specifically out of the notion of Ma'at. The purpose of law was to maintain Ma'at on earth. In order to achieve Ma'at, it was necessary to have mechanisms in place. Law therefore developed out of religion. And if you know anything about Kemetic religion, it wasn't this shit of you can't make it to heaven without this, that, and the other, right? If you look at it with religion and Ma'at being one and the same, it was just how to carry yourself in light of the fact that we're trying to build a nation here, or some will call it an empire or a dynasty. Right? These are the things you need to do to carry yourself, right? The way for men, women, and children to carry themselves, to have a peaceful community or peace within a nation, right? This is what it looks like when you build not only a nation, but actually, this is what it looks like when you build a dynasty. To continue. A study of ancient Egyptian law should therefore always allow for the close relationship between law and religion. It was the purpose of law to achieve order, balance, truth, and justice. Ma'at. Right? Although no law code has been found, and it appears that the ancient Egyptians did not have specific legal terminology or legal categories as we have today, there is ample proof that law existed and that legal ideas and concepts were applied as early as the Old Kingdom. The most fundamental elements of ancient Egyptian jurisprudence were the importance of justice, which includes associated elements of balance, harmony, fairness, and impartiality, and tradition, which includes associated elements of custom and precedent. That's the end of the paper. Before we go, though, let me see if I can find this. Let me see if I can find a particular item here. That right there is Daily Affirmations by Pauline, wearing the t-shirt that she won in the free t-shirt giveaway. Looks good. She's looking good in the t-shirt. This Saturday on Shoot the Breeze, I'll be doing another t-shirt giveaway, right? But let me find this other image to show you guys. And that's this image I'm pulling up right now. Let me just fix it. This is why you shouldn't do stuff on the fly, but you guys get it. I know you guys on the Discord have seen this image before. And let's get this right. position is right so you can see it. All right. So I'm just gonna center it like this. So in this image, you see the principles of Ma'at. Now, someone made a comment on the Discord that they've seen the wording different a lot of different times. And someone else came across, Naka on the Discord came through and said that, you know, it's about the interpretations and the translations to English, etc. And so, you know, that you might have seen these 42 principles, you might have read them slightly differently, but let's take a look at what they are. It says, I have not, number one is, I have not committed sin. I have not, number two, I have not committed robbery with violence. Number three, I have not stolen. Number four, I have not slain men or women. Number five, I have not stolen food. Number six, I have not swindled offerings. Number seven, I have not stolen from God or goddess. Number eight, I have not told lies. Number nine, I have not carried away food. Number 10, I have not cursed. Number 11, I have not closed my ears to truth. Number 12, I have not committed adultery. 13, I have not made anyone cry. Number 14, I have not felt sorrow without reason. Number 15, I have not assaulted anyone. 16, I am not deceitful. 17, I have not stolen anyone's land. 18, I have not been an eavesdropper. 19, I have not falsely accused anyone. 20, I have not been angry without reason. 21, I have not seduced anyone's wife. So that's a halfway point. Easy, you can see things like the 10 Commandments come from the principles of Ma'at. But more importantly, it's easy to see that what's really going on is that these are rules for men to remain at peace. A fundamental thing, I was telling a lady this the other day, a fundamental thing to understand about men, and you guys who are men out there, you know what I'm saying is true. Men kill things. Men will destroy things. And so there's a certain code that you need to live by when you're dealing with men, right? And especially if you want these men to be around to build your nations, build your empires, your dynasty, there's a certain set of codes you're gonna have to follow. If I commit adultery with another man's wife, that man might want to kill me. And I might have to kill him in self-defense. That's no good, right? That's one less man. That's no good when we're trying to build, defend, and secure a nation, right? So it's important to understand the reason for these laws, right? Number 22, I have not polluted myself. 23, I have not terrorized anyone. 24, I have not destroyed the law. I have not disobeyed the law. 25, I have not been exclusively angry. 26, I have not cursed God or goddess. 27, I have not behaved with violence. 28, I have not caused disruption of peace. 29, I have not acted hastily or without thought. And that's something our youth need to get. I was talking to a good friend of mine, a brother of mine actually, I was talking to last night. One of the things we got to get across when we talk about the street violence, we talk about the Chicagos and this, that, and the other, we got to get through to these 14, 15, 16-year-old youth to not act hastily, to not behave with violence. We need to teach them these type of codes and true manhood and manliness, right? A lot of what you see going on is retaliation upon retaliation upon retaliation. And when you go down and you look at what was the beginning of all this retaliation, it's something stupid. It's something that did not require violence. I'll give you an example. I don't know if you guys saw this or not, but recently there was these youths, they weren't 15 or 16, they were more like 21, 22. But there were these youths out here in California who decided to desecrate, I think they were from the Blood Gang. Yeah, they were from the Bloods Gang. And they decided to desecrate the Nipsey Hussle, or a Nipsey Hussle mural. We know Nipsey Hussle was the Crip Gang rapper who was successful in business. A lot of people look up to that guy. But at the end of the day, he was still just a thug. He was a gang member, right? And anyway, one youth desecrated this likeness of Nipsey Hussle. Another youth by the name of Indian Red Boy was filming it. A little while later, and while they desecrated it, and just after they desecrated it, they're giggling like little schoolgirls. Just like little girls, right? Not a manly thing to do. But then what happened a little while after? And some of you probably saw the video. Indian Red Boy is on a live stream talking to the brother who did the desecration of the mural, right? Talking dumb shit. And outside of the camera's view walks up somebody. We don't know if it's man, woman, boy, girl. Someone walks up and blasts him in the head. I think they shot him in the head and face, neck, or whatever, right? And we were able to witness this young man beg for help with blood pouring out of his nose, his voice weak. We witnessed him basically collapse, and you could hear him gurgling in his own blood, drowning in his own blood, right? As I believe he was shot through the lungs too, right? All because of a mural that could be repainted. Yes, it was dumb to do it in the beginning and some clout chasing bullshit, right? But over a mural, many of us, including that kid's family, have to watch that kid die. Helpless, asking, begging for help. Send help. We got to get back to some laws. And we got to apply these laws to the youth. Because the youth are breaking these laws every day. Quick to violent, angry for no reason. Right? Destructive. Right? Disruptors of peace. You can't live peacefully in your community because of these young assholes. And last word about gangs, by the way. Gangs are cowardly. I'm tired of hearing people talk about, oh, the gangs used to protect the community. They don't protect the community, and they haven't done so in a very long time. And that's if they ever really protected the community. Because I've listened to some OG guys, Melvin Farmer and those guys, talk about the creation of the different sects. I've listened to these guys, and I don't even think they realize how cowardly the talk is. They did certain crimes on these blocks. They didn't cross a certain block because they knew that the sentencing for them getting caught doing some bullshit in the white neighborhood was going to see them in jail for life. So they did this shit around black folks where, of course, the white hegemonic structure doesn't care if you kill some black folks. For a time being anyway, until they make you a legal slave in the system. Right? When you look at the mechanics of what the gangs do, all the gangs do is sneak up on people and shoot them and kill them. There's no face up, there's no fisticuffs, there's no honor in it, there's nothing in it. And we gotta be real about that. There's nothing in it. Right? And it's because we don't have laws, we don't have rites of passage, we don't have these codes. These codes are for keeping the peace in your nation. To continue, 27 says, I have not behaved with violence. 28, I have not caused disruption of peace. 29, I have not acted hastily or without thought. 30, I have not overstepped my boundaries of concern. 31, I have not exaggerated my words when speaking. 32, I have not worked evil. 33, I have not used evil thoughts, words, or deeds. 34, I have not polluted the water. 34, you know what they're talking about, right? That tells you how sensible these folks were. They weren't throwing dead animals and shitting and pissing in the water. 35, I have not spoken angrily or arrogantly. 36, I have not cursed anyone in thought, word, or deeds. 37, I have not placed myself on a pedestal. 38, I have not stolen what belongs to God or goddess. 39, I have not stolen from or disrespected the deceased. You see 39? Indian red boy and them still be alive. 40, I have not taken food from a child. 41, I have not acted with insolence. 42, I have not destroyed property belonging to God or goddess. And our ancient Egyptian ancestors, or folks from Kemet, this is how they tried to live their daily lives, right? This is why the laws weren't much changed for thousands of years. Folks tried to live, right? Folks tried to live these laws on a daily. What laws, or which of these laws do you guys live by on a daily? Which of these laws do you live by? Which of these laws do you live by on a daily? Zuliism says he might have violated Rule 39. I have not stolen from or disrespected the deceased. Absolutely. Now, and what's crazy, the kid who got shot, by the way, Zuliism, did you see that video that I'm talking about? Where the kid this kid, Indian red boy, got shot and killed? He wasn't the one who defiled. He wasn't the one who defiled the image of Nipsey Hussle. It was the fella he was on the live chat with who did. He was just filming it and giggling like a little girl. Well, they caught up to him. And the whole thing is just stupid. The whole thing is just stupid. When you look at the beefs and what's going on in the streets that people tend to want to glorify, it's stupid. On the Discord, on the Pan-African discussion Discord, there was a moment that there was a conversation, and I think Onita say articulated the concept better than I have in the past, but it's the same idea. When you look at the whole ADOS FBA beef with other Africans from the diaspora, and the claim that Africans and Caribbeans are taught not to mix with Black Americans, when that does happen, it happens for a reason. And only I say put it together real succinctly. It's a cultural product. I think I talked about this in the last broadcast I did. It's a cultural product. The cultural product of Black America is a street, hip hop, street gang culture. That's what it is. That's just what it is. Let me tell you something. In the Caribbean, where I'm from, I've been aware of gangs since about 1984, 1985. Okay? There's gangs where I come from. Absolutely. There's gangs in Trinidad. In fact, I think there's Bloods and Crips now in Trinidad. Because what happens is, in the case of having Bloods and Crips all the way in Trinidad, is when these Trinidadian fellas get in problems in the States and they go in prison, they join up in a gang, they take that shit back. Because after you finish your prison sentence, you're shipped out of here. And they take that shit back to Trinidad, which is sad. Right? But here's the thing I want you guys to check. And the only exception is Jamaica, probably. And that's a recent phenomenon. And I'll prove it. When you look at the music of the Caribbean, or even music that you get out of the continent, you will never hear on national radio songs about killing each other, songs about your woman is a bitch and this, that, a hoe, or this, that, and you will not hear that. The music that you would hear on radio in the Caribbean is music about womanizing, drinking alcohol, dancing. The exception would be Jamaica, and that's a recent phenomenon. And I say that because if you go back, like when I grew up, the music we released to get out of Jamaica, before dancehall became a thing, we used to get Bob Marley, Toots and the Maytals, right? That was the music coming out of Jamaica, right? But my point is that the music kind of gives away, as Onita say, put it, the cultural product. Listen, if I was avoiding the gangs in my country, if Razuli was avoiding the gangs in Haiti, if KW Don 7 was avoiding the gangs in Jamaica, or what have you, when you come to America, you're going to avoid the gangs and the street and anything that glorifies street life here as well. Change the cultural product, you will change that problem. Change the cultural product, you wouldn't have that problem so much. But folks won't be honest about that like I'm being, and folks will never speak up and be honest about that's the situation. The cultural product in the US is fucked up. In Black America, it's messed up. And it's not just on Black Americans, because white folks in power and monetize black folks, right? Who are willing to engage and promote and put out that kind of music and that kind of imagery. Right? Azuliism says, yes, it was disturbing. Azuliism thought the kid who got shot did it. No, it wasn't that kid. He was filming it. Right? Azuliism says on love songs. Yeah, in the Caribbean. If you listen, if someone comes and interprets Haitian music to you, Zouk and all that stuff, that shit, they're singing love songs, they're singing about drinking and dancing, have a good time. It ain't about killing. And if someone were to sing something about killing, it's like an allegory for like sexing a woman real good or something like that, right? Zuliism says he didn't know about gangs until he came to America. Well, you see, I stand corrected, right? I was aware of gangs in my home country, which is a neighboring country to Azuliisms, since about 1984-85, right? But I can tell you this, they weren't no mainstream thing, and the culture wasn't the gang culture wasn't mainstream and still isn't today. Revolutionary Matron is here. Oh, I thank you for being here. Revolutionary Matron says they have been mentally assaulting the African in America because we are the most dynamic experiment. They are testing how long can they hold the carrot out before we rebel. I could buy a cup of that, right? I could buy some of that. But the point I'm trying to make here, I'm not really trying to talk about ADOS and FBA and all that stuff. The point I'm trying to make is about you have to have some rules. People talk about this code of conduct, but I could never hear what the hell the code of conduct is. Our ancestors had a code. Our ancestors understood that you have to have this code if you want to keep this nation together, if you want it to thrive, right? As Razulism said earlier, these laws are key to living safely with your neighbor. And that's what it is. That's what it is. So Ma'at is something that we should all go back to. We should all go back to it. This particular image I put here, I created a poster of it. And I might include that poster in a giveaway before I make it something you can purchase. But this is, you know, I asked this question on the Discord. What images or whose images should you have? This is one of the images you should have on your wall. This is something, as I understood it previously, like Egyptians recited this stuff every day. Think about how powerful that is. Before you leave your house, before you hit the sack at night, you can affirm that you have not done any of these negative things. Now imagine that's you. Imagine that's also your family. Imagine that's you and your neighbors. Imagine that's you and every black person you encounter are living these laws, these principles of Ma'at every day. This is where we need to be. Revolutionary Matron says she agrees 100%, and an enforcement mechanism is also needed. Right? And that's a good point too. Right? You have to enforce laws too. Right? Punishment, reward. Right? You have to reward the people who abide by the rules. You have to punish those who don't. You see, we live in someone else's system. And in their system, even if you live these laws, if your neighbor doesn't, and your neighbor harms you, there's no telling if these people with their laws are going to come in and give you justice. And nor should you rely on the potential of them giving you justice. This is where we have to have our land, we have to build our nations, and we have to implement our codes of conduct, right? And then we have to reinforce them with reward or punishment. Razulism says, I have it on my wall. I like to hear that. I just got to say it to myself. This is something that I've taken to practice recently, of repeating these things to myself every day. And I'll tell you what's so funny about these 42 principles is they actually correspond to what a lot of people today think is deep thinking. Like someone will come through and write a book on mindfulness. A lot of people will be like, oh man, this author is deep, they're writing about mindfulness. But if you think about it, these laws here that your ancestors have left for you, these laws are all about being mindful. Revolutionary Matron says this is what was done in the Bible. Interesting. Write it on the walls, tablets, and post them as a reminder. That's what I'm saying. Have these images up on the wall. I created a nice poster here. I'm going to give it away in the future because I want to see you guys. I'm talking about I'm going to give away an actual printed, nicely printed, formatted copy. I want you guys to have these things on the wall. And by the way, you should have Gavi on your wall too. Niere is not a bad idea too. Toure is not a bad idea either. Right? You should have Africans, Pan-Africanists from the diaspora on your walls. It should be that when children come into your homes, they ask you, what's this? Who's this? What's this about? And right there you have a mechanism for teaching these kids what they need to do, what they need to know. The biggest problem that I always see in the streets is when I see a gang of teenagers. I know they don't live by no code. So anything can happen when you see them. Start getting these codes around them, right? Start getting these codes around them. Let them see it early, even before they can properly understand what it means, but let them have the wording in their head. I did not act hastily today. I did not create violence. I wasn't angry for no reason today. A lot of these kids are out here angry for no damn reason. Right? Revolutionary Matron says they are not going to give you justice. They're not going to give you justice. You have to have the mechanism to uphold a standard, right? To reward and to punish. And so if you're in someone else's land, you're not going to be able to do that. Just like you're not going to be able to practice your own, idea of economics, right? You tend to have to follow the way of the land. Change that today. Our ancestors knew it. These Europeans knew it. The Eurasian, the Arab, they knew it. They came in and they just carried on the laws. Don't let people fool you and think that we didn't build nations before. We did. In fact, we built nations into dynasties and empires. We can do it again. But we have to have the codes for how to conduct ourselves in these nations. I want to thank everyone who was on with me. I want to thank all of you who are in the chat room. I appreciate you. Revolutionary Matron is appreciated. Make sure to check out her channel. Her podcast will be in full swing soon enough. Azuliism was here. Check him out. I still have to do the screening of Azuliism's directorial debut on the Discord only. So make sure to join the Discord so when I announce the screening, you guys can be there on a Friday night to watch that film. It slipped my mind during the hiatus. All right? Want to thank KW Don 7. Want to thank Dorico Cooper Photography. I hope Dorico Cooper Photography, I wish him well also. All right? Thanks for tuning in. Saturday, we're doing Shoot the Breeze. Post your topics, come through with topics. Let's have a nice little evening on Saturday just discussing these concepts. Until then, peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.